Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams with the Y Factor. Today, a very simple thing.
We've obviously got the mini, we've got culottes, maxi skirts, you've got long skirts, you've got evening skirts, you've got uneven hem skirts, so a lot short at the front, long at the back.
At its most rudimentary, just a rectangle of cloth, but over time it's got all tangled up with politics, the notion of femininity, and the relationship between women and men.
Ruffle skirts, you've got ball skirts, as in evening skirts, pleated skirts, got wrap-over skirts, A-line skirts. That's a good shape for most women.
This thing, the skirt, seems to have provoked people throughout the ages, often men, priests, politicians, commentators and tastemakers. More than just a piece of clothing, it can, at times, be a symbol and a tool of control.
Until the Cultural Revolution started in 1966, actually there was more freedom in clothing.
Yung Chang, author of the best-selling Wild Swans, an account of her family's life in China.
So there were skirts. And when the Cultural Revolution started, and when the country became more regimented and became harsher, and actually the Red Guards stood in the streets cutting people's skirts, because wearing skirt then was condemned as bourgeois. I did wear skirt when I was a child. And then when the Cultural Revolution started in 1966, when I was 14, I stopped wearing skirts because wearing skirts was not permitted, was dangerous. And then in 1974, Imelda Marcos visited China, beautiful Filipino first lady who had thousands of pairs of shoes. And when she came to China, she was wearing this glorious, Filipino national uniform. And Mao was riveted by her. And Madame Mao got very jealous because Madame Mao only had the so-called, Mao suit to wear. So she came up with the idea of designing national costume for Chinese women. Her design was no good. It was a kind of a half to your calf, but that did open the door for skirts. So I remember my first skirt after nearly 10 years in 1975. It was like a Western, skirt for Western suits. I felt wonderful, which is why I remembered it today.
It's an interesting comparison, actually, because in Britain, in the early 20th century, attempts by women to get the vote were also accompanied by attempts by women to wear trousers, to wear a more manly-looking suit. The skirt and its hemline, the length of the skirt, had become almost a tool of control of men over women. You went the other way around. You were desperate to get out of your trousers and into a skirt.
Yes. And actually, when I first came to London at Heathrow Airport, I nearly walked into a men's bathroom because I had no idea the figure wearing trousers on the door was supposed to be a man. Under Mao, women experienced a kind of a desexualization. But after all, we were women and we wanted to be women. We wanted ways to express our desire.
The skirt has been blamed for the behavior of women.
Ali Basie, fashion historian and author of The Long and Short of It, a madcap history of the skirt.
Hemlines have, through the centuries, caused an uproar. Just the slightest bit of ankle could brand a woman a harlot or worse. And then, of course, through the evolution of the 20th century, it's fascinating to watch the hemline just skyrocket to the 1960s, which is kind of the end of the line. How much higher could it go at that point? And think of how it's branded women. There's the name itself, skirt, which has a number of definitions as a noun and as a verb and as an idiom. skirting the law, skirting the issue, and then as a derogatory term for reducing women down to and classifying them as an object through this single graphic motif.
I'm Valerie Steele, director of the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. For a long time in the early Middle Ages, men and women both wore essentially a long T-shaped robe. And then gradually this splits and men start to wear bifurcated garments, sort of leggings and a tunic, and women start to wear a bodice and a skirt. And when this happens, then the skirt actually does develop quite an elaborate structure, and it tends to be built out over skirt structuring foundation garments, whether it's a farthingale or panniers or a crinoline, a big hoop skirt.
If you think of any skirt name, anyone, especially women, could name the mini skirt, the poodle skirt, perhaps a hobble skirt or a petticoat or a hoop skirt. And when you think of each of these names, each one conjures a larger narrative, a story that tells the time, the era, the place of women during that era. And the skirt can do that on its own, unlike other items of clothing. It's also the world's oldest garment by some accounts. So it's had this long journey of telling the story of humankind, as well as the story of fashion on its own.
And you say humankind, not just womankind.
Because men, for millennia, wore what we would now call skirts, although they weren't called skirts at the time, alongside women. It was only around the Middle Ages that the idea of a skirt became a feminine garment and began to be associated with femininity and therefore weakness and fragility.
Why did that change come about?
As the idea of fashion developed, as cultural roles became more rigid, the idea of confining women into their skirts increased, and the proportions of skirts therefore increased.
It's one of the most ancient garments. At its most basic, the skirt is just a rectangle of cloth that's wrapped and tied around the waist. There are many cultures in which a kind of skirt is perfectly appropriate and typical for men. For example, I used to live in Indonesia, and in Bali both men and women would wear what we call sarongs. They were just tied differently, so that although it's again a simple rectangle perhaps sewn into a tube, the way you tied it indicated that you were a man or a woman. So even things that look unisex to us, like kimonos or sarongs, usually have signifiers in the way they're worn or the kind of patterning on them that would tell you male or female. Because throughout culture, there seems to be a great interest in having clothing indicate your gender. And in traditional cultures, also other aspects, whether you're married or not married, which village you come from, which caste or class you belong to.
My name is Dr. Jean Gelman-Taylor. I've taught Indonesian history at the University of New South Wales in Sydney for a long period of time. And before that, I worked extensively with Indonesians from a setting in the United States at the University of Wisconsin. The sarong is a tube of cloth. So it's not a cut or stitched or a tailored garment. It's one size fits all. You can be any body shape and any height, and it's made out of cotton. So it's a very functional garment. You can squat in the fields, hitch it up and work in it. But the way a middle class and an upper class Indonesian would wear the sarong, the man, is on Fridays going to the mosque. It's always in a pattern, checkered or plaid kind of pattern, and it's supposed to be plain cotton with no mixture of silk threads or anything decorating it. And the idea is that it's a garment that all the congregation wear, whether they're wealthy or poor, they wear the same style of clothing.
And Indonesian dress became an issue in Indonesian politics in the first half of the last century, as the country struggled for independence from the Dutch colonial rulers.
Sukarno, who was the major independence leader in the 1920s and 30s, he campaigned against wearing the sarong completely. He said, we're a nation of coolies, and as soon as you wear the sarong, you stoop and you shuffle and you have a feudal mentality and you bow down to all our sultans and traditional kings and you bow down to the Dutch. But if you put on a Western suit, you stand erect, you walk in, you think you're an equal. And so he campaigned against Indonesians wearing traditional costume. But he said that he wanted women to remain wearing it because that identified themselves with the nation and the spirit of the past, and men were supposed to be looking forward to progress in the modern world.
This is the Papua New Guinea fabric, which I don't know how they do it. I have washed and washed this, and it still is as stiff as a board.
This is the clothes designer Melanie Baker in her London studio.
My name is Sarah Bourdi. I'm a dressmaker. I assist Melanie Baker, and my parents are originally from Ghana, and I've lived in London all my life.
And what are you making now?
A skirt. So it's one of Melanie's clients has lots of skirts made for work, and she has requirements which she can only have them made bespoke. They have to be really long because she's a Muslim lady and not fitted, and she can't find anything in the store. So this is probably skirt number 6, all in the same style, just different fabric.
My Muslim client, she won't wear anything short because her husband would not allow it. So therefore she is conforming to what a man or a religion dictates.
Most European skirts that you'll see in the shops, etc., are not easy, but these are some skirts that I've had done made in Ghana. And I would say, as a dressmaker, these are easy skirts. They don't use a pattern, which is what we use here to make skirts. They just cut a rectangle and then they shape it from there. So you can see traditional darts, but the seam allowance, that's another difference between things made in Africa. They always allow you to put on weight. So if you do put on weight, they can very easily take it out. When you go to Ghana, just walk down the road and there's about 7 dressmakers. And fairly cheap. This I paid, including fabric, £6. So not too bad.
Is it more acceptable in Ghana for a woman to be in a skirt rather than trousers?
About 15 years ago, it did matter, and it was very looked down upon if a woman was wearing a pair of jeans, for example. Now they wear whatever we wear and there's no difference. But literally just 15 years ago, it was a big deal for if the jeans were too tight or back was on show because the top was too short, or, you know, all of those kind of things. And it was literally skirt. And in some churches in Ghana, I know they don't allow women to wear trousers, just skirts.
A woman can mask her body and hide what some might consider her flaws or her curves, which are enticing to some, with a skirt. A skirt can be many yards of fabric and cover everything. It's considered demure, whereas pants can be skin tight and you can see the shape of her legs, the shape of her hips, and to some people this is unsightly or unprofessional.
It seems that women can't win. Social taste and notions of decency have demanded at times that women wear long skirts to disguise their shape below the waist, those hips and legs too provocative for men to bear.
If you look back historically, the longer skirts were associated with higher status.
Valerie Steele again, director of the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York.
So aristocratic women would wear very long skirts, perhaps with a long train, and working class or peasant women would wear much shorter skirts, which were more practical, of course, to do manual labor in. Then the legs became seen as something that you'd only show it if you were working class or if you were a young girl. Legs became, in a sense, sexualized for women.
Up, down, or stay where they are, skirts are today's biggest argument. Remember these, all the rage in 1927, and if Christian Dior has his way, they'll soon be back. Short but very sweet, we thought them 26 years ago. If they do return, here is roughly what to expect. Now for some opinions about this fashion bombshell. Here's one from across the Atlantic.
Well, I think that women are here to stay, and the short skirts show off some of their finer points.
Oh, it's much nicer when the wind's blow with short skirts. I just don't think they're very nice at all. I hope they don't come in, and personally I don't want to wear them.
Thank you.
There were attempts to allow the exposure of the legs. It emerged slowly in the 19-teens. And then, of course, in the 1920s, you do see suddenly it's acceptable. Women are no longer wearing corsets. They're wearing short skirts. It's a much more traditionally girlish look. And this went along with a sort of interest in youth and female freedom after the First World War. Leading up to the miniskirt with many backs and forths in between. I mean, hemlines drop in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and they start to go up again in the 60s. At the same time as the development of the birth control pill, and again the youthquake movement of the 1970s, and again a whole movement towards sexual liberation, women's liberation, and a cult of youth. So the mini-skirted girl, you were showing legs again like a young girl instead of focusing so much on sexually dimorphic curves of the figure.
Hemlines zoomed upwards. The mini became the most universally acclaimed fashion of all time. But the maxi, as the 70s loomed, posed a threat to the mini. The battle of mini versus maxi promises to be an interesting one.
Why don't you overlock that, please?
And then close on the lining.
Together on the lining.
Okay. And then together in waistband.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think fashion makes a statement and it says a lot about you. So if you're in a country where, for example, you're being dictated to and they're trying to say women are like this or men are like this, it's a big deal, especially with skirt hemlines. It does matter in society where your hemline is. Even here, if I see a skirt that's too short on someone, I'll be like, oh my gosh, please pull your skirt down or please wear leggings underneath. And, you know, I'm 26 and I think that. So
why do you think that?
If you bend down, I just think your modesty's at risk. So, you know, anything can happen.
What about a short skirt in Ghana?
Honestly, if your skirt is really, really short in Ghana, it's assumed, and this is so controversial, you're a prostitute because only prostitutes in Ghana do wear skirts that are really, really short.
How short is short?
10 inches past your hips, so just under your bum.
Skirt, it's just a shorthand for woman.
You can be on the other side of the world and find the restroom by this simplified A-line skirt shape characterizing the female sex, and you know you've reached the ladies' room.
I would never forget that a skirt at one point in my life did become the symbol of liberation.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.